One of the biggest things we hear as teachers at All Saints at the moment are things like we don't know how to teach maths anymore, and we didn't get taught this way when we were at school. And this is totally understandable. Maths teaching has changed drastically over a period of time, and many of us can't always make sense of the processes we use now to try and teach our children mathematical concepts, and that's okay. So the aim of this PowerPoint and the aim of the Open Morning is that you can get a sense of why we take the approaches we do and how it suits and benefits your children in All Saints. So to give you a bit of background on what the curriculum actually states, and this is for all children, is that by the end of Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 is that children are able to be fluent in the fundamentals of maths. So that includes things like number facts, that includes that deep understanding of number, that ability to be able to recall things at quickening paces, and that's through varied and frequent practice, and that progressive over time where things become more complex. And the reasoning for that is that pupils can develop a good understanding for that area of maths being covered, and they are then able to recall and apply that knowledge more rapidly and accurately towards the end of that knowledge, and that actually when they come back to that, they can then recall what it is exactly that they did through extended periods of time. The second part also talks about reasoning mathematically. So this is about children knowing what they're going to do, spotting and understanding what it is that they're actually going to approach the situation with, being able to discuss those relationships and making generalisations about the maths that's taking place. And then from that, they develop an argument or justification using mathematical language and mathematical terminology to be able to support their reasonings as to why. And finally, it's the idea that they can solve problems. So the idea that they can approach these routine and non-routine problems in a sophisticated way. So that's things like breaking it down into series of simpler steps, trying to seek solutions to that, finding the most efficient ways to solve those problems too. In maths, we use a mastery approach. Now, this is an approach that you may hear a lot in education at the moment. It is an approach to teaching that was inspired by high-performing countries in international tests. A lot of these countries were around South Asia, so it's taken from their approaches to teaching. Funding was allocated by governments to invest in this approach and to encourage primary schools to invest in this approach and secondary schools. And it's just to support that teaching of mathematics for both children and teachers. So it's based on the belief that all children can achieve in maths. So this means that we no longer teach children different concepts based on whether they are seen to be either less able or more able. Instead, how we teach is through a whole class approach, and we offer that extra support to those children who perhaps find that topic more difficult. And then we can challenge children who perhaps are high flyers or who are finding the concept relatively simple through questioning and through variation. So concepts are built in really small logical steps, and this is explored through the process with clear mathematical models and images. What we really want to focus on when we are teaching our maths is that idea that we focus on the depth of understanding. So really giving children that secure understanding for that area of mathematics that we're looking at, and that we don't actually push them on into the next year group. What we do is we deepen that knowledge. And that's just so that all children, no matter their ability, have that opportunity to embed that learning. We try to teach, as I've said, through those models and images, but we also provide high quality resources, which we present in a structured approach through lessons, and it provides opportunities for plenty of practice for children to really embed those key bits of knowledge. Children will use objects and pictures to physically represent the mathematical concepts alongside those numbers and symbols, and this just helps children to be able to visualise what it is that they're looking at, and then really make those clear links to those more abstract things such as number sentences. So maths mastery is that approach to teaching maths, as I've previously said, where lots of children are included. They are kept at the same point of teaching. Learning is supported or pushed on through questioning or scaffolding, so where we provide additional models, additional support for children. But some of the underpinning principles for maths mastery is that everyone can learn and enjoy maths. We don't hold those preconceptions about children we know perhaps that won't enjoy it. We go in with that idea that everyone can learn and enjoy it. We try to develop really good learning behaviours with children that push them to be engaged and focus fully in those lessons. We won't see passive learning in our lessons. All children are expected to engage, to reason, to make connections as they go through the lesson, whether that be through models or representations or using some of the manipulatives that they'll see in the classroom, or even if that's just talking verbally. We push our staff to develop their specialist knowledge for teaching. So we will work collaboratively with other schools, particularly across our academies, to improve our teaching. We also work with schools across the county as well, so that we can see best practice constantly. And we design our curriculum to ensure that we really think about those small logical steps that children can take. And what the aims of that are is so that we can support that progression over time for children, but that actually we go at a pace where all children can keep up, and that learning can be really embedded and deepened, which is one of the aims of the national curriculum. So many of the points I've previously mentioned are many of the reasons why we choose to take a mastery approach to our teaching of mathematics. But to kind of put that into a bit of a nutshell, it's that idea that children develop that really deep, long-term understanding of maths, and they're adaptable in the ways in which they can approach that, using those more efficient methods, or using methods that they find that works best for them. It's an inclusive approach where we feel all children can achieve. We have children in our school who are disadvantaged, who have a particular need, and we feel that this best supports them and supports their well-being as well, because it allows them to be able to be included and not feel different in the lesson. It works at a slower pace, so we get greater progress, so our lessons are much slower than perhaps we would have seen lessons when we were at school, and what that allows all children to do is make that progress within that learning. And it just helps our children to feel more confident in maths and to not hold preconceptions about what their abilities are. And we really hopefully are creating some really resilient learners, children who take ownership of their own learning and who are engaged all the time and are happy to make mistakes. And lots of these points link to our school improvement plan, that idea of working with things that are high quality teaching, using modelling, feedback, that retrieval of prior knowledge, which we do constantly in mathematics, and that idea of being able to support those children who really need it most, those children with additional needs, those children who are from disadvantaged backgrounds. Our approach to teaching mathematics is aimed at supporting all children, but particularly our children who require that greatest level of support. At All Saints, we follow a maths scheme. This is one of the schemes that are recommended by the government. Maths No Problem is the name of the scheme, and it is predominantly based on those South Asian approaches to teaching maths, and has actually been developed by maths specialists. So a lot of the approaches that you'll see link really clearly to maths mastery, but also have been created by people who are experts in that field. What Maths No Problem will do is it will break the learning down into those really small steps which we spoke about earlier, which really builds on that key knowledge that children will need to take in with them throughout their time in primary school and in their lives ahead of primary school as well. So here we've got a chapter such as addition and subtraction, a really key concept, a really important kind of fundamental in maths that children will definitely need as they leave All Saints and as they leave Year 3 here, for example. So you can see how in this one topic is broken down into kind of many small steps. So what teachers will do is they will teach these really small sequential steps, really building on knowledge in little jumps at a time. Children won't be expected to kind of just know lots of these things going into a concept like column addition. So children will have to build upon that knowledge before they then access it. And teaching in those small steps really allows that to happen. All lessons will start off with an explore task, and that happens through Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So the explore task is designed to be a real life problem, a problem that children may face, a problem that children can make sense of, not something that's really abstract for them. And what children will do is they will receive questions from teachers about how they may approach this before they start. Teachers will make clear links to previous learning and how this perhaps is slightly different to learning they've done before and things they may need to take consideration of. Children will have lots of resources available and accessible to them so that actually they can apply a lot of their learning previously into this lesson, and if they struggle with that, they've got those extra manipulatives to kind of fall back on as a support mechanism for them. And children will work collaboratively, so children will work with one another to develop strategies into how they can solve the problem that they're faced with at that moment in time. Some of those children that perhaps will struggle, you'll see that staff go over to them to support them so that they can be scaffolded through this. So adults will support with that questioning, how will we approach this? What could we use to help us? And they'll model that to the children where necessary and scaffold it if children can access it to some degree. Children will then jot these down in their books, so they will journal, they will jot these things down, and it just allows them to have that kind of record to fall back on so that they can use those methods to support them. This kind of keeps track of where misconceptions might lie, so teachers have that readily available to support as they go through into the next section of the lesson. So once children have done their jottings, once they've had time to explore for themselves how they may approach the question, teachers will then bring the class back together. So this whole class teaching starts again. And children will perhaps be targeted by teachers where they have shown a really good kind of example or a process of going through and solving this. And they will ask them to kind of talk it through them using the correct mathematical terminology, sharing it with the children, whilst the teacher models this either under visualisers or on flip chart paper. It will reflect those key processes, but hopefully for those children that perhaps didn't get it from that explore task and that opportunity to explore with their peers, it offers them that opportunity to see how these questions could be approached and really unpick those representations and the mathematics that's actually taking place. So the teacher will question children throughout, they'll unpick those misconceptions that perhaps they saw as they were going round. They may even pick incorrect representations and discuss why. And children will make use of that mathematical language throughout, so teachers may possibly use sentence stems and support them in making generalisations about approaches they will take when they are faced with a problem like this again. Once children have had an opportunity to really unpick the structure, really see and visualise the maths that's going on, have an opportunity to see that, practice it for themselves, and perhaps add to some of their jottings as well, we then move on to the master section. The master section is that opportunity for children to practice those key skills that the teacher wants them to really embed and keep with them. And that's done in a really kind of scaffolded approach. So here you can see that kind of concrete pictorial abstract representation is really clear here. So we hope that children start off with those manipulatives like the Deans on the previous slide. They may use the calculation grid to support them in structuring their calculation. And then finally, children will be expected to try and access it as much as independently as possible. So you have that really clear kind of step-by-step process of what it looks like, in a more visual way, and then how it moves into quite an abstract approach. This also gives teachers the additional opportunity to unpick misconceptions that arose, work one-to-one more with children perhaps are really struggling with those concepts and scaffold it and model it for them. So it's really kind of embedded before they move on to any of the further kind of expectations that will increase throughout the lesson. So the guided practice offers children another collaborative approach to apply their understanding and really practice it before they move on independently. So it's done as a class, it's completed as a class. Some children who have found it or have kind of mastered it already may go ahead and answer these questions independently, but the expectation is that they do check in with the teacher to check that the models they've used are correct, that they've gone through the correct processes. And what it offers is just children that extra opportunity to see the representation, to hear the language, to see the structure, to see it being modelled by the expert in the classroom. You'll see throughout the questions that they do get progressively harder. Something will kind of change for the children in terms of the expectation. You can see by the last question here that we've moved away from 2 3-digit numbers to a 2-digit number and a 3-digit number. So the expectation is that children can clearly follow the same process even when there aren't 2 3-digit numbers. So it's giving children that extra opportunity, that extra kind of different way of seeing it, and still seeing that we use the same approaches, that we still can follow this method, and therefore they can make generalisations about that maths as well. So once children have completed the guided practice, they will then be asked to complete an activity independently. Again, you'll see here how that variation really shines through. So you can see how it starts off quite pictorially for the children, and we'll encourage them to use those picture models or those representations. But as we move on, you can see it then quickly asks children to move on to that abstract, to see how the learning they've done previously is really going to help them with this column method that's quite new to them in this lesson here. And then by the end, you can see that they are no longer given that structure, but it's actually expected of the children that they can utilise that in their own way. So setting it up, structuring it correctly, recognising the importance of the place value columns. By doing this, again, it just offers children that ability to be able to show what they've learned throughout all of those different sections of the lesson, and really show that they've actually made that positive progress throughout. By this point, really all children should be able to access independently, like I've said. Some children may struggle with this still. So what we do offer is that additional scaffold again. So those manipulatives will still be out for those children despite them moving on to those more abstract approaches in number 2 and 3 here. And teachers may be there to support some of those children who perhaps need that additional guidance. It will still predominantly be independent. They just have that extra level of scaffold and model to support them. The final part of the lesson is a Don Now Jim, which means use your head. And actually what it supports children with here is once they've completed an independent practice, it offers that different opportunity, that extra opportunity for them to really understand and deepen that knowledge and that understanding of that concept that they've been exploring throughout the lesson. So you can see there's lots of different types of questions that children will be faced with. Some of them more open-ended, so it may take children a little while to actually work it out. The expectation is that all of the links, all of the kind of representations and structures, the variation, the different ways of seeing it, and that fluency that they've developed throughout the lesson can be applied here, and it can be applied to help them with their mathematical thinking, that reasoning and being able to problem solve, particularly with these more sophisticated problems where children will have to break them down into smaller steps, make connections to what they've already done, and kind of show that deep understanding for what they have actually been covering. So in Key Stage 2, we offer a fluency session once a week for 30 minutes. So at the start of the week, children will have a 30 minutes fluency session. And this is that additional opportunity for children to develop a really good number sense. We spoke earlier about that idea of children being secure in those fundamentals of mathematics. And these are the fundamentals of mathematics, this idea of a good understanding of number and that fluency of number facts, that quick recall. So teachers will spend time using a mastery approach to teach some of these key skills. And what you'll see throughout the lesson as well is at the start of the lesson, before it takes place with the Explore task, you'll see a short fluency. This will take 5 minutes, and it's based on all of that learning that started the week. You'll see that hopefully throughout the week as well that children will have been able to abstract this a little bit further, so that throughout the week that knowledge has been deepened and hopefully will then be retained, not just through the week but actually throughout the year, into the next year group, and then hopefully for life. So children then have that really good understanding of fluency. What it allows children to do as well is it reduces that, what we call a cognitive load, that expectation of them at that moment in time. So yes, addition and subtraction is a really important skill, but with addition and subtraction comes that ability to be able to add 2 single-digit numbers. If children can do this really fluently before they access it, the only thing they really need to think about is the processes to what it is they're actually going through. So like a column method or going through that renaming process. So it just reduces some of those expectations in that lesson of children's minds at that moment in time. hopefully lots of you can kind of see the approaches we take to mathematics now and understand why we take these approaches and how they're really beneficial to our children. But there are still things you can do to help and things you can do to kind of develop your understanding of our approach a little bit further. So there are lots of ways you can get involved. You can access some of the parent videos that Maths No Problem actually offer online. I've popped in a QR code there so you can access that. It talks about watching these parent videos. They are led by one of the experts who actually created Maths No Problem. When you work through problems with children, they may get stuck. You don't need to rush them. Again, it's that really slow process we talk about. That's how we approach our maths now. Don't rush them. Allow them to kind of see the mathematics and pick it, and then move on to those more abstract concepts. And then find lots of opportunities to kind of solve or take those mathematical opportunities in real life situations. Look for patterns, look for connections, play games that involve numbers, and kind of encourage children to show them that maths isn't something they should be scared of. I know lots of our own anxieties around maths can really rub off on children, and children may come in with those preconceptions about maths based on our own feelings towards it. So it's really important that we don't show that to children as much as we can, and that actually we see that maths isn't something they should be scared of. Maths is something that everyone can learn and that everyone has the ability to be able to access in some way. What I've also included in here is the link to our calculation policy. Now, this really clearly states the ways in which that we will cover key concepts in each year group for each calculation. So addition, subtraction, multiplication and division. So if you are ever stuck on an approach, you can really see how we take it back to the basics, the sort of manipulatives that we'll use, how we then move that on into those more pictorial approaches, and how we then really abstract it into some of those number sentences that we might come across, and those key things that perhaps when we saw at school we were perhaps a little bit scared of initially. We can show how we can break it down to children, and that can be really supportive when you get that homework at home particularly. In addition to the things mentioned in the previous slide, there are also things online again that can help. So White Rose, which is what we use for our homework, they offer all of their overviews for the year for each concept, which do marry up quite well to the Maths No Problem. And again, lots of the representations will be the same, lots of the models will be the same, lots of the kind of language will be the same as well. So children will be familiar with a lot of things you can see here, and actually if they do require that extra support, this is kind of the place you do want to go to if you want to offer that extra guidance for them. In addition to those as well, we also have the kind of workbooks in the top there as well. So these were created as home learning, but they have kept them online. These are just another opportunity for children to practice some of those key skills and for yourselves, just kind of see how it's kind of ordered, how it's kind of abstracted throughout a paper, and what's expected of the children at perhaps different year groups for different concepts.